सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
About a year back, we were complaining about how expensive vegetables, fruits, eggs, chicken, fish, and meat have become. Earlier this year, we were complaining about the price of edible oil, palm oil, and then subsequently sunflower oil. Now it's the price of cereals. Wheat is becoming expensive, rice is becoming expensive, grains are becoming expensive, and inflation data that came this month for August shows that inflation has gone up again after moderating for about 3 months. And the main reason is that food prices have gone up again. What seems to be happening with these yo-yoing of food prices? And it's not just like the same items are getting costly. Some items get costly, the prices come down, then something else becomes expensive, that comes down, something else becomes expensive after that. Hello and welcome to Macro Sutra. We will try and decipher what's happening with food prices. Why is it contributing so much to inflation and what does it look like going forward? I'm YP Rajesh, Managing Editor of ThePrint, and I have Radhika Pandey of the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. Hi Radhika. So my first point, which you have tackled in your piece published on theprint.in is vegetables and poultry and meat, fruits become expensive, some of it gets tackled. Then oils, that gets tackled. Now it's cereal. Why is this, graph like this? I mean, food prices, it's a very complicated basket.
Right. So food prices is a heterogeneous group. It consists of vegetables, fruits, pulses, cereals, edible oils, spices, sugar. So each of these components is influenced by different factors. For example, during the peak of the war, during the month of February and March, we saw edible prices picking up because we are one of the biggest importers of edible oil. So when the war broke out, then there was supply shortage of edible oil. Indonesia imposed duty on palm oil. That resulted in edible oil prices rising, and then government intervened through slashing of import duties. Fruits, vegetables prices rise on account of seasonal factors. So that is always the case, not just this year, that's always the case. In addition, it gets compounded due to COVID or due to war, supply chain disruption. And now we are seeing cereal prices inching up. Initially, it was wheat because of extreme heat condition that we saw wheat crop getting damaged to some extent. And now there is this estimate that rice production will also be lower than the target. It will be lower than the last year. And then because wheat prices were rising, we were seeing that a lot of export was happening. So procurement also fell of wheat. So the food stock, the public food stock of wheat started dwindling. And so all these factors are playing their part in imparting volatility to food inflation and at different points in time. Now we are seeing that international edible oil prices have started to moderate because Ukraine has started exporting sunflower oil. Indonesia has lifted duties. So that is where we are seeing that component of food inflation has started to ease. But the other elements are still elevated.
And in the basket of overall inflation, why does food play such a big part? We always, beginning of the year, we kept complaining about petrol and diesel prices. And then because of elections in Uttar Pradesh, there was a cap on that and prices didn't go up for a long time. And once again, after the war, fuel prices became much higher. But food, how big item is food in the overall inflation basket and why does it occupy such a big place?
So we have two indices. We have the consumer price index and the wholesale price index. In the consumer price index, the basket is based on the consumption pattern of a typical household, and that is based on the survey which is conducted by the National Sample Survey Organization to assess what is the consumption pattern, and based on that the weight is assigned. So it's now quite old. The survey was conducted in 2011-12, and based on that these weights are assigned based on the consumption pattern of a typical Indian household, where food is assigned a higher weight, and therefore we see that when food prices go up, CPI inflation also tends to rise. That's not the case with wholesale price index, because that is more driven by tradable items, that has greater weightage for fuel, for manufactured items, and not so much food. Therefore that basket is different.
This mentioned, you talk about cereal prices right now, and especially wheat was an issue because of the early summer, the heat wave, and now rice has become an issue. In your piece, you have mentioned that the public stock of wheat has fallen to 26.65 million tons as on 1st of August. This is the lowest in more than a decade for this date. And I am, struck by what we see in the newspapers and magazines regularly, that, FCI godowns are overflowing with grains. There is no place to store grains. So much of the grains are getting damaged by being exposed and due to rain and sun and all of that. So it's a bit of a contrasting picture. Are those stocks not there now?
So that was the situation till 2020-21. We had a bumper crop production in the COVID year, 310 million ton. And before that also we had good stock. But we have been using that stock for distribution amongst various social welfare schemes. As part of the Atmanirbhar package, the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana was started, where 5 kg of rice and wheat is being distributed. So every month that is happening. So for wheat, at least the stock has come down. For rice, it is still comfortable. The concern is that now what government is doing is that it is distributing rice in place of wheat in the various, as part of the welfare scheme. So unless the harvest of rice picks up, there could be a problem for rice also. There could be some shortage for rice also.
And, as we discuss supply side and demand side inflation for overall inflation, if I apply that specifically to food inflation, how much of it is actually the supply side problem and how much of it is demand side? Because for a long time we kept saying the habits of Indian consumers have changed. Earlier, all of us used to eat a lot of rice, a lot of wheat, and our fruit and vegetable consumption was not so high, and especially our protein consumption was not very high. And then they said suddenly Indians are eating a lot of eggs, a lot of chicken, a lot of fish. So that price is going up. At this point in time, how much of this is supply side and how much of this is demand side?
So if we look at a slightly medium-term perspective, there we see the demand-side picture playing. If we compare the survey results of 2004-05 and 2011-12, which talks about the consumption pattern, there we see that the consumption of rice at least has come down, and the consumption of protein-rich food has gone up. And also if we look at the early 2000s period, 2004 to 2008-09, at that time we had a very high food inflation in double digits, around 10%. And that time it was mainly driven by egg, fish, meat. So much so that it was called protein inflation. It was the term coined during that time was protein inflation, because we were seeing kind of shift from carbohydrates, from cereals to proteins. So that is a long-term phenomenon that is taking place, that is shaping. But over the last 2 years, the picture that is emerging is primarily of supply side issues. First, due to COVID, where arrivals were restricted, logistics, transportation costs, transportation was impacted, and therefore the produce did not reach the marketplaces. And then due to war, trade restrictions, that impacted the supply dynamics. And now due to extreme weather conditions. So now what we are seeing is a series of supply side shocks that have impacted the food prices.
Although you do mention that during and after COVID, the demand for protein went up a bit.
Yes. So that time, again, if we just compare, COVID time, 2020, 21 and this time, we see that that time also we saw a spurt in food prices, and there again it was driven by egg, fish, meat. Again, a combination of both demand side and supply side factors. Supply side because the cost of the feed cost went up, and on the demand side, doctors encourage people to have more of protein-rich food, so the demand for protein-rich food went up. So that was again a combination of demand supply. But if we look over the last 2-3 years for various elements of food inflation, it's mainly the supply side.
And I must confess, Radhika, I do contribute a little bit to that protein inflation, because after I recovered from COVID last year, my doctor told me eat eggs every day.
Yeah.
So I consume my eggs every day to listen to my doctor. Anyway, coming back to food inflation, the states, again, you go back to the states and the data again is so interesting and insightful. The states that recorded more than 8% inflation, West Bengal, Gujarat and Rajasthan recorded double-digit growth in food inflation. And worryingly, West Bengal logged a whopping 21.2% rise in cereal prices from 13.9 in July.
Yeah.
So again, food prices are different in different states. So how does this work?
One is we see that, these 4 states, UP, Bihar, Jharkhand and West Bengal, these are the prime rice producing states, and these have been impacted by drought. So there is a shortage of, this concern that rice cultivation, rice harvest will be lower. So what is happening is that, that and then coupled with the fact that exports have been restricted. So there is a kind of concern that there will be shortage, and that is leading to less crops coming into the marketplaces, to mandis. There is this points to the evidence that there could be some speculation and hoarding happening. So, and that is what we are seeing. And if we just see West Bengal logged double-digit growth, high double-digit, 21.3%. But if we look at India's map, the entire central belt, western states, leaving aside the southern states, most of the country states, we see cereal inflation logging double-digit growth. So that is a cause of concern. And if we see from the last month, there has been a sharp increase. West Bengal saw 13% growth. This time it's seeing 21% growth. Same is the case with a number of other states that we've mentioned, that there is a very sharp increase. The pace at which food prices and cereal prices have been increasing is just mind-boggling, and that will have an impact on consumption revival going forward, because this is mainly happening in the rural side, rural inflation, and there the cereals they have a greater proportion in the consumption basket. So if these prices tend to rise and remain sticky for some time around, then it will have an impact on consumption. The discretionary consumption will suffer due to this.
I'm curious about why southern states haven't had such high cereal inflation. Is it because they are more rice consumers than wheat consumers? Could that be a hypothesis?
That is also one factor. The other factor is the quota of wheat has been slashed for a number of states as part of this reorganization, restructuring from wheat to rice. So that is also one of the reasons that, we don't know the breakup of the cereal inflation for states, but what we do hypothesize is that this is mainly on account of wheat prices picking up, and also states receiving less wheat, demand for wheat remaining stable, but the supply has gone down. So that is one of the reasons, and that story is not playing out that prominently as of now in southern states. So that is where we are seeing.
And your prognosis for the rest of the year is that, the food inflation will be persistent, and which means headline inflation will be above the upper tolerance level of 6% till the end of this year. Do you mean the calendar year or fiscal year?
Calendar year. Mainly because from October, what we should see is that the seasonal factors will become more favorable. So the winter onset of crop will arrive. So at least for the vegetables, we'll see prices going down. And now we have to see what is the pattern of rainfall going forward. If again we have unseasonal rains for this time when the harvesting begins, that will again further impact the production and harvest of both wheat and rice.
Yeah, that's it makes things a little more unpredictable for the rest of the year, Radhika. Let's take some questions from our viewers, and we had a lot of questions coming in. The first question is from Mahendra Singh. One of the biggest challenges which Indian agriculture growth faces is storage of agriculture production. So do you think by constructing scientifically advanced silos, can we somehow reduce food inflation and even increase our agricultural exports?
Absolutely. So that is one of the reasons plaguing Indian agriculture. One of the shortfalls, one of the limitation is that the post-harvest infrastructure needs to be strengthened, and we do see some movement happening there. In 2020, the budget announced an agri infrastructure fund of rupees 1 trillion. Now, what needs to be done is that more emphasis has to be on storage, particularly at this time now that we are seeing food prices becoming more volatile. So the importance of warehousing, the importance of these silos, which are these commercial structures for storing grains to prevent their wastage, becomes all the more important. So there needs to be more investments coming into these structures so that wastage can be minimized and the volatility in food prices can be addressed.
The next question is from Aditya, regular viewer, very eager questioner. Thanks for your questions, Aditya. We have recently seen that in case of increase in food prices, the government tends to ban exports of food items like we saw in the case of wheat. Do you think there are other methods apart from banning exports which government is following or can follow to control price rise of food products? It's a very good question because like we have said, we have taken editorial positions at ThePrint on this, that it makes India a very undependable exporter.
Right, yes.
And we are the world's largest rice exporter, and now there is a fear that even rice exports could be banned. They've already introduced some caps there.
Yes.
So, good question. Can we not ban and do something else?
Yeah. So, ban is a very short-term measure and it has its own ramifications, as you mentioned, that it makes us very undependable, particularly because for cereals, we are the fixers of international prices. Now, if India bans export of rice, the international prices of cereals will rise. It's just the other way around, as when we were impacted when Indonesia banned the export of palm oil. So similarly, our banning of export of rice would harm those countries which are food importers. So the second best option would be to impose export duties. That is again a short-term measure, but over the long term, the emphasis has to be on reducing dependence on rain, having more irrigation facilities, storage, agricultural infrastructure, warehousing. So these steps have to be taken, and there is some short-term measures that need to be taken, but over the medium term, again, the emphasis has to be on post-harvest storage and infrastructure.
And incidentally, those are called farm reforms, and we know what happened to farm reforms.
Yes.
Well, that's a sad story. We'll move on to next question from Nischay Vats. Hello, Nischay. It has been almost 3 years since the retail inflation rate remained outside the realm of the RBI's inflation band, that is 4%. Why is the Monetary Policy Committee complacent about this data, and what is the roadmap ahead in this seesaw global market swing?
It's a very challenging time. It's a challenging time not just for Indian monetary policy, but for advanced economies monetary policy. We saw the period of COVID when all central banks reverted their focus on growth to have accommodative monetary policy to address the growth issues, to address the growth dynamics. And that is what we saw here also. RBI introduced a number of liquidity infusing measures to mitigate and to cushion the impact of COVID. So that is what we saw. And then from late 2021, when inflation pressure started to pick up, slowly the focus started to shift on inflation. And then now again, we are seeing that kind of challenge again picking up, because On the one side, inflation remains rigid, inflation remains sticky, but on the other side, growth is also still in its nascent stage. We saw April to June quarter at 13.5%. So all central banks have to do this tightrope walk between maintaining growth, calibrating interest rate hikes in a way that both growth and inflation imperatives are addressed.
The next question is from Swapan Burman. Price rise is inevitable, he says. But how do you link it with the rise in income in the rural sector where it doesn't match? So does it mean that incomes are not matching, incomes are not growing in the rural sector, but price is picking up? So how do you balance the two?
Yeah, so that is correct that prices are rising, but rural income is not rising at the same pace. But if we look at some of the recent data, we are seeing some green shoots of recovery, because if the agricultural prices will rise, the terms of trade are becoming favorable for agriculture, for farmers, because the prices of agricultural products are picking up. Also, we are seeing that the dependence and reliance on Manrega is coming down over the last 3-4 months. So that means that the distress in the rural sector is coming down. We are also seeing an increase in rural Manrega wages, not to that extent, but there is a gradual increase. What more needs to be done is that there needs to be more non-farm occupations, and there needs to be more public works program like what was done during COVID time to provide employment and to provide non-farm employment. So that is something that needs to be done in addition to Manrega to provide non-farm gainful employment opportunities.
That is one way out. The last question is again from Aditya. Radhika, do you think the free food distribution scheme to people has also contributed to raising food prices in India, or is it because of mostly external factors?
It's mostly due to external factors and adverse climate events. Free food grain scheme was introduced when we already had good, comfortable buffer stock. We did not have problem at that time. So that did not contribute to inflation or supply side problems. It's mainly external sector, and then climate conditions, and then followed by lower procurement by government that is causing this imbalance between demand and supply for cereals.
Thank you so much, Radhika. We hope that once the festive season picks up, it's already festive season, and October will be even more busy with so many festivals. Hopefully by the end of the year, things will stabilize, and the monsoon will not play more havoc during the withdrawal phase, and we'll have a good monsoon harvest, and then the next winter crop also goes off smoothly, because food price inflation affects everybody.
Yes.
And whether you buy online, offline, in Kirana store, supermarket, food price is the same. It affects all of us, and hopefully it will be tackled in the coming months due to a combination of factors. Thank you for watching this episode of Macro Sutra. We will be back next Friday again with a new episode. Until then, stay safe and have a good weekend.